You guys can have a seat.
Is there something that when you look back, you kind of cringe? Like perhaps a younger version of yourself that when you look back just a couple years ago, you go, ugh, I wish somebody had told me that that was not cool. I have a few of those, and I brought some as evidence to show you that I was not always the cool, swashbuckling person that you see in front of you who wears the same thing day in and day out. It's easier that way. I just call it a Steve Jobs thing. It's not a laziness thing. That's fine. But I brought a couple photos. Like, if there ever been any time where you look back and you're like, man, that was a really silly or stupid decision. This is me, who I look like I'm on the edge of ejecting all the contents in my stomach. This was a pie eating contest, which very clearly I lost and regret. My brother, on the other hand, who's right next to me, I don't know if he has a stomach like 3 sizes that of mine, but his, he won. Or how about this one? When I went back to like the Bieber haircut. Did anybody do like the Bieber? Anybody do like the Bieber haircut? You went like totally into it. It was like all swoosh to the side. Yes, here we are. Like old school Bieber, like baby, like that kind of, you know what I'm talking about? You're like, no, I'm not singing it. I don't even care. Or how about this one? I'm in the back, if you can't tell. The thing to notice is, apparently this is coming back. I wanted bleach blonde hair as a kid. Like in early high school, I really wanted bleach blonde hair. But the problem is I have very dark hair, like very dark hair. And we didn't have the money for me to go to a professional stylist. Like that costs like real money. And so we just like went to Target and picked up like whatever beach blonde, stuff there was, dye and all that stuff. And the problem, if you notice like really clearly, my hair is not blonde. My hair is pumpkin orange. So my mom, she did the treatment and all of that stuff, and we were hoping and praying that it would come out exactly as I had hoped. And yet, when we rinsed it all, I remember looking in the mirror, like a freshman in high school, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, it's orange, it's orange, it's orange, it's October and it's orange. Why is it? Oh, maybe this is my hatred for fall. I think I just did I just saved myself some therapy dollars. I didn't. I need plenty of it. But I remember looking in the mirror, and my mom was really assuring me. She's like, it's going to wash out. It'll wash out. It's not going to be the final color. Like they say it on the box, it's not going to be the final color. It was 100% the final color. And so for perhaps 2 or 3 months, like a full quarter of the year, I walked around with a pumpkin on my head because you see it's in combination with the Justin Bieber hair I showed you earlier. So it was like this nice orange bowl that I had around my head, like I had stuck my head at a pumpkin and was like, this is cool. And then I kept going. And then so for Halloween, what was better? It was like a cow. I don't know why that was the thing I chose. But I brought one more photo for you to show you just the development. Anybody have this kind of a thing in their home? Does your mom have this is a photo of you at every grade? Mine does, and it's terrible. And whenever I bring friends over who haven't been to my parents' place or something like that, they take photos. There's a bunch of these photos floating around that are going to be used on me, probably at my funeral, which I'm not excited about. But if you notice, in 8th grade over there, I got really into shell necklaces. I don't know. I have no idea why. I don't even think they were cool. I think it like had their moment for a second, and I was like, this is my personality. This is everything I wanted. I'm an Illinoisan wearing shell necklaces, and I'm not by a beach with orange hair, Justin Bieber hair, and the like. Have you ever done something where when you look back, you're like, ugh, that was young me? Oh, that's what I thought was cool. That's what I thought would like get attention or connect, or I was like in this situation and I did this, that, or the other thing, and I look back on it and I'm like, ugh, it's a little cringy now. That's kind of what Paul, in our next installment of our Uncommon series, that's kind of what Paul is going to be getting into. He's going to be talking about what it means for us to grow up, what it means for us to grow out of the old ways of being, like the childish things that we did to our hair, or the way we'd oscillate from this thing or the next, or the way that we would like obsess over having a boyfriend or girlfriend at the age of 12, like the way that we were just like children. And so if we just dig right into our Ephesians 4 text, we'll see kind of what Paul is getting at. And I'll start off in verse 11, then we'll read the part that we are covering today. But as review, this is what we talked about last week. Paul says in Ephesians 4:11, and he himself, Jesus, gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, and teachers. Remember, we talked about the diversity of gifts and how that's necessary. To equip the saints, this is the purpose, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, to build up the body of Christ until we all reach unity in the faith and knowledge of God's Son, growing into maturity with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. Like really quickly, what that means, stature measured by Christ's fullness, basically just that we are growing into what it looks like to be united with Christ, that we are growing into looking more and more like Jesus. And so Paul states maturity positively here. He says that maturity is unity in the faith and knowledge in God's Son, that it's connection to one another and connection to Jesus. And this word knowing here, it's more than just intellect, it's more than just book smarts, it's more than just like Bible reading, it's like a deep conviction. This is a knowing that has seeped into every core and crack in our being. It's like when you have a waffle and you want the butter or peanut butter to like be in every single waffle hole, you know what I'm talking about? It's a knowledge, it's soaked into every, does anybody put peanut butter on their waffles? Is that like just a me thing? You like make a Reese's peanut butter cup? Yeah, okay. Here we are. I just wanted to see if I was alone. That's fine. Now we can keep going. What knowledge is? Knowledge is that it's every single nook and cranny being consumed with the love, affection, and joy of Jesus. It's when you know that you are welcome. When you are consumed with the knowledge of the Son of God, it moves from the head into the gut, into the very core of our being. But then Paul continues in our text, and he states what maturity is negatively. He stated it positively, now he's going to state it negatively. This is what immaturity is. Verse 14, then we will no longer be little children, tossed by the waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by human cunning with cleverness in the techniques of deceit, but speaking the truth in love. Now this phrase literally means truthing in love or living the truth out in love. And the force here is truth in action. It's truth put to practice. Again, we're not talking about just an abstract philosophical principle. The Bible really doesn't deal in those like Western metaphysical categories. It is a very Eastern book. It's a very Eastern sacred text. And so it's not talking about truth abstracted from life, but truth in action. It's truthing. It's truthing. So he says, but truthing in love, let us grow in every way into him who is the head, Christ. I love the way that a new version has put it. Just last month, IVP, University Press, released a new translation of the Bible with the methodology being that of a missionary text to First Nations people in Canada and North America broadly. And they created this text that is based on the storytelling and oral culture that they're trying to reach with the message of the gospel. And I think it has some really interesting insights to offer us. So here is this text in the First Nations version. It says, "We will then be like the chosen one, mature human beings, living and walking in his ways, fully reflecting who he is. No longer will we be like children who are tossed about by the waves and follow every voice they hear in the wind. We will no longer listen to the ones who behave like tricksters with their forked tongues. Instead, as true human beings, we will walk out this truth on the path of love." Isn't that beautiful? That's a beautiful rendering. It matches Paul's metaphor with more metaphor. It brings images into the text itself. And so you see, we will no longer listen to the ones who behave like tricksters or children who are tossed about by the waves, follow every voice they hear in the wind. Instead, as true human beings, we will walk out this truth on the path of love. This is a vision for Christian maturity. It's unity in the faith. It's knowledge, knowing at the deepest core of your being. And it's living the truth. And the emphasis here is on action. And you see it in this the FNV, the First Nations version, walking out this truth on the path of love. There is a path of love. The Christian faith, the Christian tradition has a path of love. It is a path marked by what they call the chosen one, or Jesus. Now we see Paul use a vivid metaphor here to define what immaturity is. He gives that negative example, and he really doesn't delineate out like an immature person does this and this and this and this and this. Instead, he describes a scene. He describes a scene of what it's like to feel immaturity in us. He gives us this image of tossed. Now, imagine this with me. I used to be a sailing instructor, and on the days when it was most windy, when the waves were the highest, the little sailboat children that we would send out into the rough waves, we would monitor them, of course, because they would often end up at other people's piers. But when they would go out into the water, when they would start sailing, the waves would just kind of toss them overboard. Or, even better yet, it would topple the entire craft entirely. The small sailboat was completely subject to the waves and outside world. And Paul is giving us this image of people who are completely subject to the chaos of the waters, to the chaos of the waves, those forces outside of our control, that when the slightest thing comes up, whether it's even big or whether it's small, we are completely thrown off kilter. And then the second image is that of someone lost in the woods, because we can't remember what the true voice sounds like. We're following this voice into the middle of nowhere, and so we're just kind of lost. And so Paul pairs this image of being tossed by the waves and lost in the woods with this kind of an understanding of this is what immaturity looks like, so that we can avoid being like children, because children are easily swayed by new teaching. Their brains are still very much developing, and that's what it's like to be a child. They are easily deceived. They are, in summary, they're fickle and they're gullible. My dad sent me, I asked my dad last night, I was like, hey, what are you doing for Halloween? Mom's gone, she's out visiting her family. What are you doing for Halloween? And my dad took a Marco Polo of him with Halloween candy, and then right next door, I mean, he's been like gardening this summer. Like everybody got into a thing during the pandemic, you know? So he's been like gardening this summer, and he's had like an abundance of tomatoes. I have no idea why, but I feel like every time my wife and I visit and then come home, we come back with like 1.5 gallons of these cherry tomatoes. And my dad, he goes, "Oh, you know what I'm giving out? I'm giving out cherry tomatoes. And when I give them out, the kids are really confused. They have no idea why I'm giving them out." And I'm like, "Well, it's because it's the worst thing ever, Dad. Plus, they're unwrapped. Like, what is your problem?" But I think it's this element. Like, if you were to do something like that on Halloween, the kid would just be confused. They're just easily deceivable and trickable. I don't think he was actually giving out cherry tomatoes. It's not like the guy he was. He had candy. He's like a real person. He's not like a dentist or something like that. Dentists are real people, but you know what I mean. Sorry if your family are a bunch of dentists. But I think some of us actually understand what this feels like in like real life. It's not like we even have to depend on the metaphor. We know experientially what it's like to be tossed to and fro, what it's like to forget the voice and feel lost. We kind of understand this implicitly. We know what Paul is saying when he's like hinting at we are easily swayed, that in our rational moments, maybe we wouldn't have followed this. And this is like what kept coming to mind for me as I was like thinking about this, like what is a common experience? Do you remember in the early stages of the pandemic? I mean like late March, right? Everybody had just gone home and we're all like freaking out. We have no idea what the deal is with COVID. And then we started receiving these texts. You started receiving these texts. And it was like, my mother's sister's brother has a friend at the Pentagon who heard a guy in passing once say that all of Illinois was going in lockdown. Did you guys receive these texts? You know what I'm talking about? It was like they were going around like crazy. And no one had any idea, but we were just like passing it along. And so it was like this game of telephone over and over and over again until you're like, who started this in the first place? And I remember reading one of these texts from my wife going like, this is silliness. But also at the same time thinking, do I have enough toilet paper? And then going, I probably don't. I probably need to go and go, there's no toilet paper. Paper towels. Nope, that's going to ruin everything. Okay. It's like in those early stages when we were sitting there going like, what is true? What is not? We're tossed to and fro. We're not quite sure what's happening and we're operating out of fear. That's the idea of being swayed. That's the idea of immaturity. It's the sense of being unmoored, that your life is subject to the chaos around you, that you can't get your bearings. And what I want us to notice, like first off, is the Bible isn't harsh about this. I think sometimes we come in with our preconceptions that Paul would come down and be like, stop being swayed, knock it off. But it's not, actually. Paul just names it. He doesn't even seem to put much judgment by it. He just kind of names it. And I think that's actually a hidden grace in this text, that Paul just kind of names that's immaturity. That's what it means to just not quite be mature. He's not shaming you. He's not telling you that you're not saved. He's not like jamming it down your throat and being like, why don't you be better? He's just naming it for what it is. Hey, we might have some more growth to do. Hey, we might have some more development to do. And we get that in like every other context. Like in sports or athletics or something like that, when we just have more growth and development to do, it's not a shaming thing. It's just, hey, I just realized I have some work to do. And is it possible that this word of grace for us, that it actually is a word of grace because we want progress immediately? So when Paul says something like, we don't want to be tossed to and fro by like little children, and we don't want to be deceived, and that isn't like the vision for what it means to be a Christian, is to be subject to the chaos around you, but to rather have this groundedness. And what sometimes we hear it as judgment, when in fact it's Paul going, the expectation is not that you all of a sudden become a Christian and that you are like this superstar, doing this everything that you can be, that you're like pastoring a church, going out to be, like that's not necessarily the division. Like progress takes time. It's actually a slow moving beast. And that's okay. And Paul gives us the grace to mature. Because as infants, as when we are like baby Christians, when we are infants, we consume. That's all we do. We are just like, I've never heard this before. This is brand new. And so you just start reading and listening and like consuming everything you can, having conversations, wanting to be around Christians because babies consume. And just infants in the faith consume. They don't contribute, they consume. And that's okay. That's part of the process. And then eventually those infants turn into children. And at the child stage, there's a need for stability. There's a need for a sense of constance. And so they need to be given stability. Like this is what it means to live and grow as a Christian. This is what it means to develop. They need a sense of stability. They're still tossed to and fro because what they've realized they need is that groundedness. For adolescents, they need to challenge what they learned in their childhood. Some of you remember your adolescence with your parents or guardians or grandmother, and you're just like, okay, yeah, that's what that was. But adolescents, they need to challenge, they need to test, they need to see if their faith is actually real. But as they pass through adolescence into adulthood, adults contribute. Adults contribute. They care for the needs of others. They see things that need to get done and they do it. They see that there are people who need the love and grace and care for Jesus. And instead of just responding harshly or critically or cynically, they come with a mindset of truthing in love, living out the truth as characterized by love. And the elderly, they leave a legacy. The elderly leave a legacy. They look back on their life and they see their stages and then they realize they leave a legacy of faith for people who are coming after them they can follow in. That's the journey from infant to adulthood and elderly. So what does it mean to be tossed, right? So what does it mean to be tossed in our context? Like really like critically, what does it look like for us to be tossed to and fro? We could take this in so many different directions, but there's one specific thing that comes to mind, and it's this idea that we're going to talk about in a second from a guy named Ben Sixsmith that he coins it, and he says, with just a twist of Christianity. With a twist of Christianity. One of the main things I see in our modern moment, particularly among young people, is living an otherwise normal, completely copy-paste life from the influencers and all of that, but yours is just a little bit Christian. Yours is just like a twist, just a hair more. It's where like Jesus operates on background app refresh, where it's like he's never in the foreground. He's just always kind of there lurking in the background. He's not really informing our lives. He's not really taking much energy for us to learn and understand and grow and develop. He doesn't call the shots. He doesn't really show us the best way to live. Like we don't trust him that much. He's just kind of there. He's like hell insurance or like a meditative guru or somebody that we take leadership coaching from, or he's like this inspirational shot in the arm to like, hey, don't be so down today, neighbor. Like that's kind of like this understanding of just who Jesus is in the background. It's you, but with a twist of Christianity. It's when we like let culture and friends call the shots completely. Theologians call this syncretism. Syncretism. It's where you take something else and you marry it with Christianity, but the problem is always that it's not Christianity anymore. This is something that Ben Sixsmith observes when he was kind of observing some of the recent significant pastoral failings of a couple megachurch pastors. And he has a bit of a longer quote I want to read with you, but I think it's really insightful for our time today. So this is what he's noticing in the article titled, "The Sad Irony of Celebrity Pastors." Ben says, there is mainstream culture, celebrities, fashion, music, modish political activism, and a message of self-love, but with a twist of Christianity. Most people stick with mainstream culture because they can have all those things and premarital sex. That's a joke. You can laugh. That's a joke. That's clever. That's funny. We can see thee with a twist of Christianity trend elsewhere. Jerry Falwell was a representative of the right-wing, business-oriented evangelicals who offer capitalistic self-enrichment and hubristic jingoism, but with a twist of Christianity. Then there are progressive Christians who promote the usual left-wing causes with a twist of Christianity. While different in beliefs, such people share patterns of thought. The former believe secular individualists mysteriously share God's wishes for what should be done with money, while the latter think that secular progressives mysteriously share God's wishes for what should be done with our bodies. So, and here's the question. So, if Christianity is such an inessential add-on, why become a Christian? He continues, he says, I'm not religious. It is not my place to dictate to Christians what they should and what they should not believe. Still, if someone has a faith worth following, I feel that their beliefs should make me feel uncomfortable for not doing so. Elsewhere in the article, he says, it seems like these megachurch celebrity pastors have given up the call for me to look like them, and instead they're trying to look like me. If their beliefs should make me, I feel that their beliefs should make me feel uncomfortable for not doing so. This question has haunted me from the previous paragraph. So if Christianity is such an inessential add-on, why become a Christian? I really do believe that is the question for our modern moment. I believe that is the question for your generation, for my generation, as the fact that 40 million churched students will leave the church in the next 30 years. I think genuinely it's because Christianity has become an inessential add-on. And we're just kind of going like, so what am I spending my Sunday mornings doing? Why would I? Doesn't quite make sense. So why do you think we are so likely to be chameleon-like in our beliefs? I think there are some really fair instincts that drive us towards this, like some good instincts that can drive us towards like accommodating to culture. I think partly it's because we've seen Christianity defined by the worst expressions of what it is. Like on the news, they're not taking the people, like we just had friends this last weekend whose entire apartment burned down. It's like a tragic, tragic story. Dear friends, whose apartment burned down. And you know what happened? They turned to the church and they said, we have absolutely nothing. And they didn't ask for anything. But a GoFundMe was started and they ended up raising double, triple the amount that they initially needed in order to get themselves resettled and repopulate the things that were so sacred and dear to them. You know what stories you rarely hear on the news? It's those stories. Instead, we hear stories of like the crazies who are outside protesting soldiers' funerals. Instead, we hear the stories of the foul-mouthed pastors who will say terrible things about communities that we are called to love. Instead, the things that are sent for retweets are the ones that are like the hot takes against certain people groups, against certain political positions, and those are the ones that we see grace our timelines. So I think there's a genuine desire to say, I think the message of Jesus is something else. Because we look at so many occasions of people who bear the name of Jesus and are trashing it. And we don't want to be associated with those who co-opt the good news of the gospel for power and control. And so we adopt whatever permissive attitude culture gives us, and we baptize culture in the name of Christian faithfulness. And I feel this instinct. I really do. But if on some level we're not willing to make any uncomfortable claims of Christian truth that distinguishes us from cultural peers, if on some level we are not willing to live in a way that is truthing in love, some way that is different, we are not building an uncommon community. We're building a very common community. We're building a community that does not need Jesus at all. And so we're tossed to and fro, like, should we do this? Should we not? Like, what does this look like? And if one of the primary ways that we're tossed is to adopt this thing with a twist of Christianity or like with a sprinkle of Jesus, then what is the vision for Christian maturity? What is the vision for an uncommon community centered around the person and work of Jesus? Well, I think it means three primary things that has a huge impact on you, your friend group, and this community, and has the possibility to revolutionize, to renew, to change Elgin. I went on a retreat a few years back called Practicing the Way, and they put it like this, a three-pronged vision for maturity. They said that our goal as Christians is to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did. To be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did. So the first one, to be with Jesus. John 15, Jesus gives this whole extended metaphor about vine and branches, and what he's saying over and over again, he says, I am the true vine, and you are the branches, and you can't do anything if you are severed from me. And so for us, as we're thinking about being with Jesus, Jesus says, I want you connected to me. Why? Because being with Jesus is the best possible life. Being with Jesus is the connection to joy and peace and happiness. And I think over the course of the pandemic, over the course of the contested space that we live in, if your response is to look out at the world and say that the world is doing it well, then I don't know what world you are living in. But you can retort and say, yeah, but I look at the church and I say, is the church doing it well? Is this thing actually worthwhile? Which is why I say, let's return to an ethic of being with Jesus. We cannot have a transformed community without transformed people. We cannot have a transformed community, an uncommon community, if you yourself are not being, living, spending time with the one who loves you, who invites you into himself, who says, I am here to be present with you forever, full stop, and no matter how long it takes you, I am going to walk with you into maturity because I love you, I want what's best for you, and I am here to shower my grace and faithfulness on you. Some of the strategies that Christian spiritualists or people who want to practice these things, they say there are Christian spiritual formations. So like really quickly, there's a guy named Richard Foster who came out with a book called Celebration of Discipline. And this is what he says. He says, we have inward disciplines, which are meditation, prayer, fasting, and study. And then we have outward disciplines, which is the practice of simplicity, submission, solitude, and service. Then we have corporate disciplines. There's confession and worship and guidance and celebration. Celebration is a corporate discipline to practice being with Jesus. And so even just like really clear as an application point, when was the last time you just opened the one of the Gospels and said, I would like to know what Jesus has to say? I would like to spend time with this Jesus. The second one is to become like Jesus. To become like Jesus. Over the process of being with Jesus, you end up becoming that which you behold. You become like Jesus if you are with Jesus regularly, and it begins to manifest in your life, and you begin to do this truthing in love, taking on the very ethos of the God who came to seek and save people who would otherwise hurt themselves, and instead Jesus says, I come to free you, to liberate you, to be the kind of person that you can trust and depend on and pull you out of this space of being tossed to and fro, but instead giving you a sense of grounding, of peace, of presence. Then the last thing is to do what Jesus did. To do what Jesus did. To both live and speak the truth. Jesus was incredible. He was the one who people wanted to be around. People left their entire livelihoods to be with this Jesus because the very miracles, the presence, the words of kindness and grace and affection that he showed people, people were like, this is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this. And Judson, what would it be like if we were a community marked by being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing what Jesus did? I'd like to close with a prayer from Walter Brueggemann. And so I'll use this as a benediction and then we'll be dismissed. But I pray that you receive this. From Walter Brueggemann, he says, "We are counted your people. We are grateful to be called by you and glad for our special way of faith in the world. You have marked us and named us and signed us, and we are different. Different memories, different hopes, different fears, different commands, different ways of being. That difference we find glorious, but at times a burden too severe. We yearn to be like the others in power, in money, in freedom, in certitude, and in security. Like the others, uncalled, unburdened, unembarrassed. We come to you in that deep trial of difference and likeness. Engage us in our difference. Give us courage for our different vocations and energy for our different hope. In the name of our crucified, Easter one, so unlike all the others. Amen. I love you all. Have a good rest of your day.